potential for that smaller end situation. But basically what we did is you just say, all right, let's split them in half. How do the 18 largest departments unit costs compare to the 18 smallest departments? And when you look at it in total population, you might not be able to read that text box there, but if I blow it up, you know, the 18 largest departments measured this way have a per capita cost of $224. The 18 smallest are $370.
Are you taking the costs off their financial?
Yeah. Yeah. And then the same relationship shows up. If you look at it by center line mile, you see there the 18 largest by center line mile have a per center line mile cost of 50 grand. The 18 smallest have a per center line cost of just over 79 grand. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to tease out as we work through, at least the public works data. But when you raised that point, I said, I have a graphic here that
you already did it.
Your timing was perfect.
Joe's way ahead of us. As
Always,
usual.
right?
I don't think, Joe, I don't think this surprises anyone.
Yeah. Yes.
It's intuitive.
So I don't think we had officially started the meeting, but I wanted to.
Yes, we have now.
Yeah, but that's more intuitive.
It is, yeah, but I mean, to the point, I think, and speaking to what Lee brought up, at least in conversation and, you know, and in sort of revamping the presentation, while we have certainly left some numbers up on the slides, I've certainly found that it is probably most engaging when you're able to tell the story of the zoo and 911, and not here's what 911 saved us, but we know 911 has saved lives.
It works.
Right?
It
works. And we know what the zoo was and what the zoo is.
Yeah.
Right? And, you know, and that seems to be what draws people in, more so than a real deep dive into the numbers.
The two data geek questionnaires at Spanish Action League Wednesday night was the first time in all of these presentations that I've been that we have had that concentration of data questioning.
Right.
Any other time, no matter who the presenter is or where we are, Kevin, you're absolutely right. It has been much more about things that they see or use or know, or we can immediately say 911, Okra, Centro, those library, those kinds of daily use reminders. It's not easy, but it can be done, and it works.
And people resonate.
Exactly. So it was those two guys were an exception.
Those two guys, I'm like, man, I gotta get stuck with these two folks.
They were great though.
They were good, no, it was really good.
It was really, really good.
Yeah, but I think for those of us who don't do it all the time, putting a couple of those examples into the talking points for us would
We'll do
really
that.
get us through the hump of that.
We'll do that. We can add more now.
We should probably get started.
Yeah.
I think that we'll probably have 2 or 3 more people joining us and probably get here as we move on. In our agenda, the high point, 2 high points of our agenda. First is we've got Mark Pattison here with us, who is Director of Local Government Services. Tony unfortunately couldn't join us because of a schedule change. And the other high point, I think, of this meeting is Joe and Joe's presentation to us with some of the new analytics and stuff like that he's been working on. And then, of course, we'll go through a review of where the committees stand, what are some of the challenges, and what are some of the things that are working out very well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Mark Patterson. And what Mark is going to do is tell us a little bit about what some of the programs that the Department of State has to help facilitate modernization of government. And I think it's of particular interest to us because we need to learn about those programs and see how some of those programs can help us do what we've got to do moving forward. So, Mark, it's yours.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here. We're very excited about the effort you guys have undertaken, and we'll watch it closely as you move forward. So anything we're going to be supportive is something we want to do. Kathy asked me to do a little bit of my background. I've actually had 2 careers. One started when my father got elected to Congress and told me I wasn't gonna get a job with him or anybody that thought I got him a job. So the next best thing, and I went to where my mother's passion was, and I worked in the Association for Retired Children for 20 years. Started out as a temporary van driver for the preschool and ended up as the director of the residential program, serving people with disabilities, trying to help them get in the community. And that was turned out to be pretty good preparation for going back to my father's side of life, a political career. Troy in 1995 had a fiscal crisis. We were about to get a financial control board. Sometimes when there's a crisis, you do things you can't normally do, so I decided to run for mayor. Got elected by 119 votes, and was there for 2 terms, restored the city back out of the financial control period in the minimum period of time, and term limits like you have here in Syracuse. After that, I left to go to the controller's office, where I was the deputy controller for local government services around Hennessy, and was also then the executive deputy controller for state and local government accountability. So at some point I moved on to work for the governor. I went back to my old career for 2 seconds, a couple years at OPW&E, ran their budget and HR shops, and now I'm at the Department of State. So that's my background. Work on local government, reform local governments would happen. It's probably not all that encouraging, but for a long time, at least Rockefeller and maybe beyond, the state's been trying to figure out the right changes for local governments. The local governments, as we were talking about earlier, were set up in the days of how far could you get on a horse in a day, and things have changed a lot. But the governments haven't really changed since 1920, the last time any major change happened in local governments. So this governor's done an awful lot trying to make changes from tax cap to tax freeze and local government efficiency plans, which everybody filed this past June. There's some specific programs. The Financial Restructuring Board is one for distressed communities who are allowed to apply, and the Department of State helps the Division of Budget do the analysis, comprehensive analysis, and try to come up with recommendations to help local governments who are in distress. The key to that is they've actually come to the state and said, we want your help. We're willing to take your suggestions. And those communities are eligible for up to $5 million of aid that will help them transform, not just an aid package, it's not another way to get state aid, it's a way to get restructuring money in place. The Department of State runs a relatively small grant program, the Local Government Efficiency Program, $4 million a year. Its grants are generated through the CFA process, so they're due this July, I think is the deadline, once a year. But it's actually been a very successful program, in many ways picking off the low-hanging fruit, although there's some fairly big things, but we've gone from, Tompkins County had a healthcare consortium they put together, so that they started providing healthcare to municipalities on a regional basis, which has saved considerable funds. Westchester County has almost entirely merged their police forces into a countywide police force. We do a lot of infrastructure work where communities, because of the cost of upgrading facilities, have recognized the need to coordinate, consolidate. So we've done wastewater treatment plant facilities to make sure they were upgraded in a way in which address regional problems. I was just at a press conference the other day on the Albany pool communities, cities on the river face extraordinary costs in trying to make sure that their outfalls don't go into the water, make sure that the Hudson River, obviously something everybody agrees with, is a precious resource that we want to get back to recreational and swimming level and fishing level. As the city of Troy, I know per experience has 53 outfalls, more than any other city in the state other than New York City. And in order to separate the sanitary and storm sewers, it's $1 billion. It's unfathomable. And we got there because every community did it each on its own, within its own capacities. But they pulled together taking a regional approach, and actually, really interestingly, took a regional governance approach. So they have this city RPC, which is a regional planning group, operating the mitigation plan. And they're saving themselves millions of dollars because they're doing it with not some storm separation, but porous asphalt and a lot of other green kinds of technologies. And they're making a lot of progress. We funded the administration of that. Again, we don't do ongoing funding, we do transitional funding, but that's been very successful. So there's a lot of things like that. We funded a group out of Pace Law School because, to make a point I'll make later, that the connection between governments and economic development is something that not everybody focuses on, but it's important. So Pace Land Use Center has a project with mayors roundtables and corporation council roundtables, and so they're trying to develop an economic development strategy that's common amongst their communities, and then align their permitting and land use strategies around it, so that wherever a business goes, they have a sort of similar face. And we think there's no question that will make it easier for people to develop in that region. So lots of things like that. We do also run a continuous program, the Citizens Empowerment Tax Restructuring Grant.
Tax credit, citizens,
Well,
tax credit, CETC.
The tax credit comes along after you do a program. We fund grants of communities looking to consolidate or dissolve, and again, that program goes slow. We haven't had a lot of dissolutions, but we've had some, and we see more and more conversations of towns and a couple counties we're talking about. So you know, that program is available, and there's a tax credit which goes to the community, the surviving community, and funds up to $1 million of ongoing increased aid. The big program that everybody's talking about is the governor's put $150 million into the budget for municipal restructuring. The Secretary of State's been given the responsibility of developing the application process and managing the fund. So we're working on that now, and the Secretary is very interested in hearing from communities and local governments about how they think that fund will be helpful to them. Again, it's similar, it's one-time money, it's not operating aid, but it's a lot of money. And we're hoping that it stimulates bigger ideas, and I don't mean bigger meaning has to be good population, but just to more out of the box thinking. There's some assumptions that we're working with. One, there's one-time money. Two, that we're looking for transformational, I'm not sure I love that word, but transformational projects, real municipal restructuring, kind of the idea that if you started all over again, is this how you would do it? The answer is almost always no, you wouldn't do it this way if you start today. So what could we look at today that would be as if we're starting all over again? Certainly looking at things that are regional in nature, having a focus on that. Countywide, although sometimes countywide is necessarily the right way to say it's multi-county, but any of those things like that. We also know that one size doesn't fit all, so again, we know that parts of the state have different approaches. I don't know quite exactly how it will be structured. We are thinking a little bit about, I've talked to Rob a little bit about our thoughts that it would be a little bit more like what I would call a venture capital approach, meaning how do you bring innovation to market? It's not by saying, what's your big idea? Here's a pot of money. It's, what's your idea? How can we help you get that idea farther along? So either with some planning grants, or maybe sometimes what you need is an infrastructure help to tie some things together, or technology thing together. But we're kind of open on that. And the Secretary is hoping to do a series of roundtables around the state where we're asking local government officials and others how that will be helpful. So that's really the programs that we're running. We see a lot more conversations from local governments about trying to do things differently. And, you know, the local governments don't all love what the governor's done. And it is true, local governments have always worked hard to lower costs in the way that they could. That's local government officials live and die by tax raises and tax rates. So times are tough. It hasn't been. It's not new in local governments. It's not likely to change. So local government officials are oftentimes working hard to try to figure out new ways to do things. And there's lots of barriers, lots of impediments, but we see more and more conversations from local government officials about how do we get their police departments together, how to shrink the number of fire districts that are out there, and some other ideas about how we make a new city, or how do we do this on a regional basis. We have a website which gives you more details about the LGE program, and we certainly encourage people to apply to that. You need to apply for planning money. There's a $12,500 per community available 50-50 match, and $200,000 for implementation money up to $1 million. So if a number of communities get together, it can be some pretty sizable money to, again, get things going, low hanging fruit, the kinds of things that people see as possible. So we're very excited about what you guys are doing here. We're paying attention to it, and I think it would fit nicely with the restructuring fund if that, as that goes forward.
Excellent.
That's great.
Great.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Good, that's a high bar.
Any questions for I think the program we have, 150 million, is transformational, to support transformational activities. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I had it too, and I think the key is to, stand shoulder to shoulder with the local governments to try to figure out how to make their ideas, or local community ideas move forward. State's not smarter than anybody else. We think local governments they know what's going on, they know the barriers. I mean, again, a lot of times they don't have the capacity to spend enough time to figure out how to get
To break the
barriers, because they're working hard to plow the streets or pick up the garbage or make the parks what people want. So we need to help them do that.
So hypothetically, if we're presented with an out-of-the-box solution, would your office provide technical support on implementation and on dealing with the state law environment and implementing?
We would, whether or not we have enough bandwidth at this point, we might need to say, okay, then can we fund some sort of other assistance to you, depending on how many other ideas there are out there, but that's the goal. We would try to provide technical assistance, and we do this now, technical assistance and pathways to other parts of state government to help with barriers that need different kinds of resolution. The idea of a state resource team, the community comes by and says, we got a big idea, can we bring a state resource team in? It's got DOT there and DEC there and Department of State, and we're all trying to lean in to see if we can figure out what problems need to be solved. Now, a lot of there are issues that are statutory, and those statutory things haven't changed because they have constituencies. So that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Lots of times, once you get that idea, well, we got to get rid of home rule. There are a lot of people who don't like that idea, and it's not, not unreasonable. I think the hard part
For home rule is something that comes up every week,
it does.
and it's like this amorphous thing that's
Yeah.
out there. But I've never heard of a really complete cogent description of how home rule works in New York State. Is there a publication? Is there a?
We have, I'm not sure, we have it in our website with a local government handbook that talks about home rule. But it's pretty simple. I mean, anything that's not specifically exempted by state statute, becomes the purview of a local government, depending on their form of local government. So not all local governments have the same powers. So counties can't do land use planning. That's a barrier for regional thinking, but towns and villages, cities hold power over their own land use plan. So that's great if it's protecting you from the mine that's somebody wants to develop and nobody likes, but it's bad if it gets in the way of sort of longer term
Was that constitutional, or is that for the lack of the state statute?
Constitutional. Things can be exempted as much as constitutional. And New York's a strong home rule state. Not every state's like.
Mark, you,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Mark, you brought up a couple of interesting examples, I think, near the top of some of the other things you see happening around the state. Tompkins County, I think you said, with a healthcare consortium, and Westchester County moving towards a unified county police department. I don't know how close you've been to those, or are those you could give us a little more detail on sort of how they're getting to where they're getting, and what, if any, involvement your office is having with that?
Well, the Department of State, or the Tompkins County initiative happened before I got there, but I'm pretty familiar with it. They set up a separate group to help sort of the Council of Governments. They used the Council of Governments. Got everybody's buy-in. They did have to get state changes in terms of reserve requirements, but they got that through. The project took a little longer. I think almost all of Tompkins County, and maybe some things outside of Tompkins County are involved, so it's a mix of city and county and towns and villages that are participating. I think their savings were well over $2 million a year combined, and they've stayed, the savings have continued. So Westchester's evolved. Westchester's got a strong tradition, actually, of sharing amongst towns, and we just funded Mount Kisco to join that, and so they have got a program where they have transferred all but a few of their officers to the county police department. They've maintained some, still do traffic and some smaller kinds of more local things. And it's been largely very successful overall. Well received. That's a very suburban county outside of White Plains, so, although actually very rural too. But that's one. And the best I can tell, it's the police side has been positive about it. There's more career opportunities, more resources that they themselves can take advantage of. So, and we have SWAT teams all over the place, and it's crazy to have too many SWAT teams. So, we can do one good one.
Yeah.
I think, this is not new to just government. Everybody tries to figure out how to lower their costs. Banks are trying to figure out how to lower their costs, and then they have to fight for your service, convince you that they really care about you, that they know who you are. I mean, that's the dynamic. So governments have to lower costs, and we also, some of these vestiges of other governments are part of the community, and they're an important part of the community. When you fight to keep those, you don't have to have the same level of services in every community to find the ways to support the community side of it.
Related to Kevin's question, but at a higher level, can you put what we're doing here in Onondaga County in a broader statewide context? I mean, I know that there are, as you said, there are villages that have been looking at dissolution. Macedon just voted to move forward with their dissolution. We have communities that are looking at sharing police services or eliminating police services. But to what extent is this effort, county-wide, completely rethinking the way local government does the business of local government? To what extent is that happening in other communities to the best of your knowledge?
I'd say yours a much bigger effort than I have seen. Although the western part of the state, there's just a lot of activity. I don't mean just Buffalo, I mean outside where people really feel like they can make a difference, and there's a lot of communities. But they haven't quite started the baseline approach that you have, and don't have quite the same mix of civic and government and business leadership. It's much more just government leadership. And so I think this is a little unique in that sense. I think also it's exciting. And I know your public engagement strategy has been very robust. You know, all the research, you know, says that these things have to start from a base of trust and building relationships, because when it's people you don't know, you don't trust the data. You say, well, why is that in my interest? And I know when I was in Troy, we had been in trouble before. We've been asking people to sacrifice, and if you ask people to sacrifice, most rational human beings hold on to everything they've got, because you know, why wouldn't you?
Instinctive.
But if you ask them to sacrifice for a better day, well, everybody does that. You save for the war, you save for your kids' college, you save for, you know, a new bicycle, because you see it in your interest. So I think the trick is we've got to have a way to help people see it in their interest. And if it's not their interest, well then, why would you do it?
No, absolutely. Mark, any thoughts or questions, perspectives?
Just taking it all in.
You spoke a little bit about the connection between economic development and government. What are you seeing from the state level tying that together? What are your thoughts with regard to?
Yeah, I don't see a lot of talk about the direct connection at the state level yet, although I've talked to Rich Tovey, and he said, well, that would make sense if the people that are applying put a local government restructuring or something in there to support their application, that would get them something. So I think people see it, but I think they've also been afraid of it in terms of they've got a big idea, they don't want to get bogged down in the mess of some of the local government change processes. So I don't think it's first on their mind, but I certainly think that if you're really trying to transform the economics of a region, you have to think about how does government support make that better or worse. So I think people would be smart to think about that in their development of the state initiative.
Well, actually, one of the first initiatives between the city and the county was actually to put the economic development
Yeah.
offices together.
Yeah.
So I think that really is some of the political leadership, they clearly get
Yeah.
that
Very
we've
good.
got to work together to really create economic activity.
Yep. Good stuff.
Dennis.
One of the things we hear a lot too from local governments about economic development, particularly the whole rural association with the property taxes. And one of the things we hear is that unfunded state mandates that local government sometimes doesn't hear. Do you think the state is more receptive to assisting with that?
I think the state is interested in looking at that issue, but it's a complicated issue, right? So unfunded mandates has a couple definitions. One is being asked to do things and you want somebody else to pay for it. So if it's just about, well, I don't want to pay for it anymore, the state should pay for it, I'm not sure that helps, right? And then there are other unfunded mandates that people say, well, if I didn't have to, I wouldn't do it. But most of the unfunded mandates aren't things that people wouldn't do. They want them, they just don't want to pay for it anymore. And there's a legitimate discussion about who should pay for the right things, and I think that's an ongoing.
Well, I think like Medicaid, for example, we're the only state, one of the few states that does it, but most other states don't do it.
Yeah.
And that might be an example. I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's a good example, and you know, past governors have put in place some cost shifting, so increasingly the state is picking up that cost, that growth. They haven't gone totally over, and that's a you know, balancing act between the cost of government, state government, the cost of local governments, and again, there's certainly an argument to be made about what's the right way to raise money for certain kinds of things, but you know, it's not a free good, right? So if the counties don't pay for it anymore, somebody is, unless you're thinking that you shouldn't provide those services anymore, which I don't think anybody's making that case. So I mean, I haven't seen any evidence that the state's going to take over, you know, Medicaid, but they have taken over a number of the components of Medicaid. And,
Yeah, I mean, you know, we met with the builders yesterday, and came through loud and clear that, you know, the issue, a large part of the issue for them is the real property tax burden. And what you say about who pays for, you know, it's just a question of shifting it to some of this, obviously a valid point. But for them, it's a competitive environment. People can choose to be here, they can choose to buy homes here, or they can choose to buy homes in another state where they don't have that type of tax burden.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the part where they don't feel that there's been responsiveness to the concerns that they've been addressing for, you know, living with for 40 years. And they're pretty clear about it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the governor's been pretty clear. He's not funding the status quo, he's looking to fund transformation to something that will drive lower property taxes. He's made lower property taxes a hallmark. Again, it's not an easy question. And I don't really have the instrument. I suppose the state's got the same problem if you were starting all over again, would you do it the same way? And the answer might not be yes, but you got to figure out the transition. So.
Other questions? Well, Mark, we really thank you very much for coming out and joining us.
So anytime?
Your insights were very helpful in outlining programs that the Department of State, I think, is going to help us a lot as we go forward.
We certainly encourage local communities to be part of this. If you've discovered things that where local communities can make progress, you know, the application period is open, and hopefully they've started thinking about it before today, because you know, it takes more work than that. But there is a planning phase and there is a implementation phase.
Excellent.
Of course, I now just thought about the question that I had.
Okay. I'll leave.
You just sparked my question from an application perspective. From a public engagement, you know, is certainly a big cornerstone in terms of how we shift and move the dial. From a funding perspective, seeing that that's at the core and heart of some of the transformational work, is there funding that one could, you know, a municipality, Onondaga County could think about applying for from an engagement perspective? Because we have a load of different vehicles we're thinking about, but you know, in order to kind of drive the dialogue, to manage the dialogue on a go-forward basis, especially over the next 6 months plus, communication and engagement has got to be off the charts, and probably I would say a year and a half following any of the core work around recommendations will be critically important in terms of ongoing dialogue and facilitation. So, is there an opportunity for public engagement to be looked at under that banner of funding?
Yeah, under our programs, only as a component of an implementation program that was around a consolidation of services. Again, you can apply, you've got to be around consolidation, that's what we do. We can give you up to $200,000 per community for implementation, and it's conceivable that part of that would be some sort of transitional communication piece, but not, the front end of it wouldn't be the public engagement piece from our grant money.
Back end, okay.
Excellent. Again, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Very
And
exciting.
we'll keep you advised too, as to where we are in the process, to get you draft materials and those kinds of things. as they are available. So,
Okay, can I stay for your update?
You
or-
have time to stay, right?
Yeah.
Great.
We view the Department of State as a partner in this.
We're glad to be there.
That's very
Excellent.
good. It's very exciting, Mark. It
It
really
is.
is.
Very good.
Why don't we start with the review of the committee chairs in terms of progress being made and things that we maybe need to do a little bit differently or whatever. So, Melanie, why don't we start with public engagement?
Okay, great. Pull up my. So, public engagement met this week, and a core part of the work that we are focused on is the next 6 months. What do we need to do to drive information over the next 6 months? In particular, how do we begin to socialize the work that's being done by the sub-teams? And what do we need to do to kind of hit our milestones of providing final recommendations by year end? What do we need to do as a commission to think about how and if we're prepared to go, out to the community with information regarding some of our recommendations? So that was the big focus of the committee meeting, in addition to what are the vehicles and what's the wraparound strategy, given what we have with the Maxwell students.
Yeah.
Looking at our budget, so I'm hyper-focused on budget right now.
Never enough.
So very, very hyper-focused on budget, and how do we kind of get to at least the finish line of this phase? And then how do we usher in phase 2 and 3 of the public engagement initiative? So one of the thoughts that surfaced during the meeting, and I'll ask the team to certainly jump in on this, because you may have a better insight than I, is do we look at focusing on a monthly basis on each one of the 5 sub-teams? And then do we do a drill down with that subject matter for a month? We also, again, and I think we discussed it at the last meeting, talked about a 30-day blitz, if you will, a public engagement blitz. But, do we water down the information? Do we not do the information justice? So, a couple of different options out there. Committee, thoughts, jump in?
Some of this thinking is driven really by, I think, 3 things that we've seen. One, in some of the other communities that we've looked at, we've seen where they've been able to drive much more robust engagement when not necessarily tackling the issue as a whole in each presentation, but really helping some of the subject areas be teased out in ways that people who have a particular affinity for those will want to come in and speak to them. So on the one hand, it gives you a more robust level of engagement by more interested parties. The other thing that we believe happens is that if you're at a meeting and you're trying to discuss a number of different issues, or if you're trying to communicate a number of different components of government modernization in a given media piece, it can be harder to grasp, and it can also be more easily derailed by one piece of it overtaking the other elements. So separating them out may in fact draw more people in and get more meaningful public input, frankly, from people who are more concerned across a sort of weekly succession of the work of the different committees. We think the idea of a sort of 30-day blitz, something that was really, I think, most prominently exemplified when we looked at Boulder, that what it did was it took limited resources and allowed you to concentrate them and amplify your voice in the greatest way possible, recognizing that it's over a limited period of time. And since certainly limited resources are one of the things that we're dealing with, we feel like that may be an approach that would work well for us. And finally, what we think that it also allows us to do is, depending on the time frame that this commission chooses, it may allow us some flexibility as our different committees sort of get across the finish line with their work. So some may be ready sooner than others. This allows us to engage in robust public discussion without having to necessarily wait for every committee to have its work be completed. So it provides a little bit of flexibility. Hopefully it provides us some efficiency in terms of our budget, and hopefully it produces the most meaningful public input in the process.
I think that's really a good idea as well.
The monthly.
Yeah.
It gives, I think also, we learned from the rollout of the baseline, which was this great body of work that had never been done before, but it was really hard for all of us to do in 15 minutes in a PowerPoint or a presentation. It's hard, not hard is the wrong word, but it's a lot, it's a lot of information, and to try to find the key points and hit them appropriately for the public or a particular stakeholder audience was difficult because it's so much information. So sort of breaking it into, we have created by our committee process natural experts in infrastructure and economic development and land use and public engagement and public safety, etc. So let's utilize that and sort of say, okay, here's again the parts, and ultimately obviously we'll have the final document of everything. But I feel like it just has a better, like if we're in Rita's board meeting again, it's easier to have the conversation.
Actually, I think the infrastructure is pretty close to being able to.
We have some
maybe be the
committees who
first.
are very ready, almost ready.
And so August could be our kickoff time.
Yeah.
Right? August could be our kickoff time. So what we need to think about is from the overall commission perspective, one is everyone on board with that strategy, that approach, and then lining up who could present. And then thinking about, based on what we're presenting, what are some of the challenges we may have with the data or rollout of that information, and thinking about timing and all of those other things. And then we can do a wraparound strategy for each committee per month. So if, that might be the best to start with infrastructure. I know that there was.
This is Sharon, I'm sorry, could you take a line? Hi Sharon, this is really breaking up.
Yeah, Sharon, we can.
There's a problem, we're having some
Should I redial it in?
problem. Hang on 1 second, all right, Sharon?
Okay, yep.
The thing with infrastructure too, our last two subject matter meetings.
Sharon?
One was with Central.
Yeah.
And one was with.
Is that worse?
Which really frankly
Yeah,
are examples.
Yeah, I think so,
where
it's a little clear.
regionalization,
Thank you.
Sorry.
For example, advance
No problem.
infrastructure countywide and beyond the county. So I think there are some specific examples that maybe could help in the discussion and the presentation.
Right, so we could do a wraparound. I'll stand up because I have a feeling Sharon can't hear.
Sure.
So we could certainly do a wraparound in terms of the strategy, how do we invoke social media, how do we get the news, print media, radio all on board to help us facilitate those messages? And do we give the, a calendar of what we believe will be the upcoming recommendations just to begin to fuel more interest?
Yeah.
So that's really it. I know I missed the second half of our meeting, so is there anything else that was covered that I missed?
The only one question I had is trying to keep track of how many people we have reached. Do you have a sense of where we are there?
We are definitely over.
1,300.
Oh, yeah, 1,300 was our number we reported on in May.
Yeah.
So, I gotta believe we're probably bumping up on the 15 to 1,800 individuals. In terms of what our touch points have been on our social media campaign, we can update. We'll make sure going forward we update on hits on social media. We'll provide those data points at the next meeting.
Good.
I can get you website traffic as well.
Good.
The consensus site continues to be for like I don't remember exactly what month we launched it for you guys, but every month since it's been launched, it's been, of all of our project sites, the most heavily utilized, so we still have traffic going there pretty regularly.
Good. So Mark knows these are individuals that have actually attended a presentation.
Right.
So So we're really, it's really
Hey, Joe,
not very strong.
can you track where they're getting to the site from? Does it take?
In some cases, we can. So if they're using a Google keyword to get there, if they're searching government modernization Syracuse,
Yeah, I
we
just
can give you
curious
that,
of how,
that
how,
keyword
'cause
permutation.
we're really not, I mean,
The-
other than some of the, I guess some other group meetings and stuff.
The last time I checked, overwhelmingly people were coming in simply by typing the URL, which is what ConsensusCNY.com. Because that's on all the materials that we always present. It's on the face cards and that.
Geographically?
No, I just was curious, I mean, that's interesting that they're just using the URL, because that means that those people at the meetings are actually going
They're
to
actually
look
found
at
out.
it, or are
Right.
people searching for something and then finding it, that's all I was curious.
Now, from a touch point perspective, we've hit over 30 different organizations. So, I think we're trending and moving in the right direction in terms of, messaging. But that, that's a far cry of what we still need to do. We need to get to many, many more. But we believe once we have some data that folks can react to,
We'll be hearing from them.
they will call us and
Absolutely.
we'll have many more opportunities to engage. But that also requires probably a more robust engagement from many more people to help facilitate some of that dialogue.
Excellent.
Mark, we may draft you to come give a couple of speeches.
As the former mayor of Troy.
I have to take vacation time.
Right, and we're asked in these meetings of those examples of where people got it right and where they got it wrong.
Yes, we are.
So, and folks want to know, are you looking at that? Have you evaluated best practices? Yeah.
They were challenging.
Yes, especially the other night. They were phenomenal.
Frankly, for them to get to those kinds of questions, it means they're engaged, which is exactly.
That's what we want.
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
thank you very much. Why don't we go to Larry on economic development?
Sure. The Economic Development Committee has actually met 3 times in the last week in different permutations, so we've been very busy. We started with a joint meeting with the Governance Committee, so I saw the report on Steve's behalf as well. Our guest was Professor Myron Orfield, who is the director of the Institute of Metropolitan Opportunity in the Twin Cities area. Fascinating background. He was an assistant attorney general of Minnesota. He was a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Also came from the political side. He was a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives and the Senate, and was the architect of a number of important legislative changes in the areas of land use, fair housing, and school and local government aid programs. He also led legislative and judicial reforms at the federal and state level in about 5 or 6 different states. He talked to us about the experience of the Twin Cities area with the Metropolitan Council. And the Metropolitan Council is a regional policy-making body, planning agency, and provider of essential services to the Twin Cities metropolitan area. The mission of that organization is to foster efficient and economic growth for a prosperous metropolitan region. And it's a 17-member council that's a policy-making board, and it's been around for 50 years, which is kind of amazing. The council initially grew out of a crisis, and he kept on emphasizing that one should not let a good crisis go unwasted. And the crisis that they were facing in the Twin Cities area was the pollution of groundwater, really having to do with their wastewater treatment systems. It's a creature of the state legislature, and it applies really just to the St. Paul, Minneapolis region. Providing services in 3 areas, transit. Over the last 50 years, the Twin Cities area has developed a very robust light rail system, wastewater collection and treatment, affordable housing, and the council is also charged under state law with establishing enforceable regional code policies, which really goes to your point about land use plan, home rule. He actually had quite a lot to say about home rule when we talked top one. They also developed long-range plans for transportation, aviation, water resources, and regional parks. Its jurisdiction is a 7-county area, 7-county area. Since 1970, the population of this very cold and snowy community has grown by over 1 million people. And the 7-county area covered by the council now has a population of 3 million. He attributed the success of the council to the region's tax-based sharing program, effective state legislation, the development of strong allies, especially with inner-ring suburbs, developers, and really the majority of municipalities who are the beneficiaries of the tax sharing arrangements. He cautioned us that, I think he pointed to our name consensus. He said we can't be naive about the idea that you're going to reach a complete consensus of our community on this. He said the road's a long and bumpy one. It's been going on for 50 years in their community. But he said it's certainly something worthwhile in the long run. So that was all food for thought, and I think it was a very powerful presentation that led to sort of discussions of big picture issues. Yesterday, we met with the homeowners, which is sort of the Home Builders Association. And it was actually Bill Byrne from Infrastructure and Rob and Murph and Lori and I met with home builders, and I want to thank Mary Thompson for arranging that. Their concerns were really profound and far-ranging. One of the things that came through loud and clear was the current system does not provide for consistent, professional, and apolitical application of assessment, zoning, planning, permitting, and codes enforcement. One person made the point, he said, normally I like to stick with the devil I know. I've been sticking with the devil I know for a long time. I don't want the devil I know anymore. Give me a devil that I haven't been introduced to yet. And everyone around the table pointed to the real property tax burden as an impediment to the success of the association's members. And of course, they all pointed also to the tremendous need for job creation, economic development, the retention of young people in our community, and those were really discussed as core issues for the economic development of the community, but also for the success of their group as home builders. There was also a meeting yesterday afternoon, which I was unable to attend, and maybe Murph or someone could report on. That was 200 report after the meeting with Ben. Anything for the second? Sorry to put you on the spot there.
No, I have to address the incoming residents of St. Joe's at 11 o'clock today. Don't even get sick July 1st. Like one program. You don't hear anything else. Don't end up in that hospital July 1st. Yeah, we met with Ben Walsh from the Syracuse IDA, and IDA reform, of course, is a big part of the labor community. The Labor Council, even the state AFL-CIO has been on record as supporting IDA reform. But he talked about the Syracuse IDA and some of the concepts and going into property tax issues too, is that some of the things the city has done, for example, it's always been, if you want to get down to the smallest level, people remodeling their homes or fixing up their homes, property taxes are always punitive. Like, okay, you fix up your house, now your property taxes go up. So the message is the community, don't fix up your house, keep your properties bad so you can keep your costs down. So like, obviously that's not what we want to do. So the city does support, he has money set aside to help people prevent that from happening so they can fix up their properties, whether it's commercial or private, without the burden of additional cost, property tax costs. The other things that he brought up was how the IDA functions, and the fact that not only is there a Syracuse IDA, there's also a county IDA. And the Syracuse IDA works within the city of Syracuse. The county IDA can also overlap into the city. So you actually have two agencies. And one of the issues that came up in more recent years, if you remember, was the proposal to build a hotel at Destiny, and well, if we're not gonna be able to work with the city IDA, we'll just go to the county IDA. So I think Rob Simpson called it the nuclear option. So you've got choices here. So there's this overlap, the duplication right there. So that was also a concern that was brought up. And then I also mentioned to that is that, what impact it has on the city, that 50% of the properties are tax exempt, yet you still have to provide all those services. And then also the state mandates as well, the state mandates and the impact that has on the city budget. And the fact that the city's trying not to raise property taxes, they want to encourage development. And we've seen, I think, a consensus that you can't be everything to all people. There may be developers that come in that will find the suburbs more suitable for whatever reason. Maybe it's the infrastructure that's available, maybe it's access to parking. Other people will find the city, a metropolitan area, maybe more approachable. That's what they want. For example, O'Brien here moved out of the suburbs and moved into the city. Excellus moved from the city and moved out of the suburbs. So you're going to see some of that flip-flopping. And I think if we took a more regional approach, we can say to someone that's coming into the area, well, what are you looking for? So that we're not going to have one thing, but we're going to have different things that are available as well, to any potential developer. So, and there was a concern too about financing, and the fact that also there's other arms that do financing outside of the IDA. So you even have more agencies you have to deal with. There's one for the city, there's another one for the county with that as well. So that that adds to it. And you just talked to about the pilot projects and the fact that the idea of a pilot is you're still paying taxes, but you're not going to be paying taxes on the improvements that you made to a certain property. And that was the whole point behind it. It's not a way around taxes, but simply means where you're not, again, punished for developing a property and able to pay the higher property taxes initially. And that was also to help with economic development as well. So those were, I think, some of the more key points that came out of the meeting.
That's great. Really is some really good ideas. Dennis, thank you. I think we'll pass on municipal operations.
I can just give a
Oh,
quick
okay.
update on that. A meeting's out of town, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we will be having the next municipal operations committee meeting over the next couple of
July
weeks.
20th.
Oh, yeah, it's later July. Okay. But the goal for that meeting is, number one, if memory serves, we're going to hear from the library director.
And
And Dan, that's right.
Social services.
And then that committee is very well positioned to quickly pivot to talking about what its recommendations are going to be in each of the functional areas. Remember, municipal ops has really everything that doesn't be captured by the public safety committee, by the infrastructure committee, by economic development. So they have 7, 8, 10
basket.
in their portfolio. But they've talked to stakeholders in each of them, and they have the white paper that they've been working through. So that committee's pretty well positioned. Infrastructure, you alluded to before, Neil. In Bill Burns' absence, infrastructure is pretty close in terms of recommendations around general public works, streets and highway services, water, wastewater. And we have working drafts that are being circulated among the committee members on those. You met with Centro just over the last couple of days.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is a very informative meeting. It was very
Okay, good. Yeah, I wasn't able to attend that. So, but again, I think infrastructure committee is very well positioned to have recommendations tied together in short order. I know public safety committee met earlier this week to review a draft of the recommendations around fire and EMS. Have we pivoted to police yet? We've had an initial.
We had a our second
Yeah.
police meeting is Tuesday.
Perfect.
So,
So public safety, police obviously is a critically important issue. It's a high visibility service. It's one that we want to spend some time with. But I feel that public safety is also very well positioned. And then I know I'm the last item on the agenda here, Neil. If we want to just combine governance and my piece on the agenda, that makes sense.
Joe, why don't we just roll into it?
So Larry had given you the update on the joint meeting that took place between Economic Development Committee and Governance Committee on, what was it, Tuesday of this week, when Myra Norfield participated. in advance of that meeting, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was June 11th, we had a small group of governance committee members, and we spent some time really priming the pump for the conversation with Orfield. So what I did was I went through the Metropolitan Council model in the Twin Cities, its genesis, the rationale for it. We anticipate having an opportunity sometime over the next 3 or 4 weeks to also have a conference call with Jerry Abramson, who was the last pre-consolidation mayor in Louisville before it merged with Jefferson County in 2002, or I think it was 2002. So we would expect to have a similar conversation to what we had with Meyer and Orfield to get some really unique on-the-ground perspective about what drove them to that change and what the results have been since. But in advance of those conversations, again, we wanted to prime the pump and make sure that committee members were up to speed on the rationale, the typical rationales that we see around the country for thinking at a broader regional level. We spent some time talking through the Louisville model, the Twin Cities Metropolitan Council model. I would say, and this is actually the slide presentation from that. I don't want to spend time, and I know we're up against the clock here because we have to wrap by 9, but that governance committee meeting went just shy of 90 minutes. We actually recorded it as a webinar because we knew that we were missing some governance committee members. So we have that available. I think what I'll do is we'll put that in the Dropbox. And if anybody wants to grab that, if you want to sit down on your iPad or whatever, or your computer, you can watch that at your leisure. There was some really good conversation around these models. But one of the things that really the thing that we spent the most time on were some vital statistics for the region. And I just wanted to spend maybe 4 or 5 minutes walking you through those slides here because particularly in terms of Orfield's presentation, right? What Orfield was very effective at doing in Minnesota was using graph presentations, maps in particular, to demonstrate regional similarities, right? Our default often, and frankly we've heard this as we've gone around the community for certain public engagement meetings when we met with government officials, is well, there are city challenges and then there are suburban challenges. And maybe the city's more challenged than the suburbs, and so, you know, kind of throttles on this notion of we're all in this together. And what we wanted to do with this presentation was provide some data which in some ways challenge those preconceived notions. So population trends 1950 to present, I don't expect these will shock anybody. The top line, of course, is the national number, the red is the state. The kind of green number in the middle, which is tougher to see, is Onondaga County as a whole. There's the city of Syracuse. And also, not surprisingly, that's what's happened net over the last 65 years in the rest of the county outside of the city of Syracuse. Pay particular attention to what's happened in the rate of the increase outside of the city in Onondaga County in the last 20 years, because that will come back in a subsequent slide, right? Because everybody tends to focus on that bottom line, the purple one in the city of Syracuse. So of course, in raw numbers and rate, greatest decline has been in the city of Syracuse, right? So again, this doesn't surprise anybody, but this is the decline that we've seen from 1950 through the 2013 population estimates from the Census Bureau. So as a result of that decline, because the city has fallen at the greatest rate of any part of the county, its share of the total county population has declined, right? 1970, it was 42%, 37% by 1980, and you see the trend continuing. So the city's share of countywide population from 1970 to 2013 down by 11 percentage points. But here's what's critically important to recognize. Again, we're trying to pull this conversation above individual municipalities. The city has not been the only community to lose population. This is from 2000 to 2010. More than half of the municipalities in Onondaga County lost population. 7 towns and 11 villages. 18 of our, if we don't count the county itself, right? 18 of our 35 general purpose local governments lost population. The raw population loss some are big, some are small. I mean, some of the red municipalities only lost, 25 residents, right? But the point is, just very, very simply here, the greens grew, the reds didn't, the reds declined. So when you think about it in those broader terms, right? Sure, that challenge is concentrated in the city. This isn't just a city challenge, right? We're seeing this trend throughout the county. Of course, the concentrated decline in the city. And this is where you start to transition into what's the fiscal impact of that contraction been, right? We've, in real dollar terms, from the mid-1990s to last year, real taxable value in the city is down about 17%. Okay, so this is in 2013 dollars. So it stands to reason. We lose population, we're losing our taxable value. So just as we did on a previous slide with population, here's the city's share of countywide taxable assessed value at a few points in time over that time frame. So we've gone from 22% in the mid-1990s to 17% as of 2013. This is what's happened. This is not in real dollars. This is just in dollars, actual dollars by year. That's been the city's taxable assessed valuation growth over that period. Again, it's been outpaced by inflation, but over that period, that's been its taxable assessed valuation growth. This is what's happened in expenditures over that period of time. So the gap has continued to widen. And the reason why we focus on taxable assessed valuation here is when you think about it, that is that major revenue line, of all the city's major revenue lines, this is the one that it really has the most direct control over. It doesn't have complete control over it, right? But it's the one that, that is most within its control. It doesn't unilaterally control its access to sales tax, right? That it gets through partnership with the county. It doesn't unilaterally determine how much state aid it gets. It doesn't unilaterally determine how much federal aid or federal grants it gets. Property tax is the one that's most within its control. And you see the extent to which it's been outpaced by expenditure growth over that period of time. Then we spent a couple of minutes looking at the overall regional economic performance. We spent, as a precursor to this part of the conversation, I'm happy to share this article and a couple of others with anybody, but we talked about the extent to which the city's economic vitality is tied to that of its suburbs. There's a robust body of research out there that shows the very tight correlation between per capita or household income growth in the central city and the rest of the metropolitan region around the city, job growth in the city and the rest of the metropolitan area around the city, and a whole host of economic indicators. So how many people have we actually had employed? If we use 1990 as our point of departure here, so everything's benchmarked against 1990, that's what we've done nationally. You see the impact of the recession, how we dropped there in 2008, 2009. That's what we've done in New York State. There's all of Onondaga County, city of Syracuse, Onondaga County suburbs. So a stark difference in this compared to the population chart, right? So again, trying to bring the conversation up to a higher level, that this isn't, a city-suburb dynamic. This really is a county dynamic that's playing out. So what we did was begin to pull together some of the map presentations that Orfield did for the Twin Cities region in Minnesota. This is poverty mapped at a census block group level. The orange and the light green, I don't know why Esri does this with the color legend, but the orange and the light colors are the highest poverty concentrations. Sure, it's absolutely a city challenge, but frankly, this is a northern half or northern two-thirds of the county challenge. And what I did to the committee was challenge them to draw 35 general purpose local government boundaries on that map. You can't do it. The challenge here is, the takeaway here is, this is a challenge that completely ignores municipal boundaries, right? Completely, it couldn't care less about municipal boundaries. Average unemployment rate in 2014. Again, we have some concentrated challenges, concentrated higher unemployment in the really central urban core. But you see those darker shaded areas are really throughout the county. Again, carve this up into 35 local governments. You can't do it, right? Median household income. Again, very challenging to carve this up into 35 local government boundaries. And then again, the population map. So this is, we had a pretty robust conversation around this at that governance committee meeting on June 11th. Again, I'll make that recording, that webinar, available to anybody that wants to look at it. Maybe we can just send the link out to everybody once we get it into a Dropbox. But I wanted to kind of sensitize you to what the governance committee was talking about here. And really, this was used as a springboard to some of those questions that the governance committee is going to ask over the next 3, 4, 5 weeks. Things like, you know, to the extent that we have truly regional challenges, do we have a regional governing infrastructure that allows us to adjudicate truly regional issues at a regional level? Or are we trying to adjudicate regional challenges at a small box level? And what they did in Minneapolis and St. Paul was empower the Metropolitan Council, that regional infrastructure, not with all service delivery responsibilities, but strategic ones, right? Economic development, infrastructure, land use planning. All the local governments continue to exist. You want a police department? Fund a police department. You want a fire department? Fund a fire department. And they all have their own elected bodies to make policy for their local area. But they saw it as critical to have a regional governing body to adjudicate truly regional issues. So that's what we're trying to do, is look at data pieces in the context of Onondaga County so that we can pull the governance committee conversation to that higher level.
This piece is probably the most telling piece that we've had a chance to really take a look at.
Well, I just spent the last couple of days working with a similar group in Maine, and what they said was we looked at some of their similar data.
How could they be similar to us? They're in Maine.
More similar than you would expect. But they said to look at the data pieces. They said you look at a map like this, and it busts some of the myths we think about ourselves. That the problems are all over there, or the opportunities are all over there. And then you pull back, you say, all that stuff transcends municipal boundaries, and in a lot of ways, we're facing common challenges and have common opportunities. So it's a good starting point.
This could be a
We're all in this
together.
This is, yeah, I'm looking at these maps saying,
Did you see your face?
this has to be a part of the whole public engagement conversation,
Right.
because it sets context for some of the recommendations. And
Right.
without setting this type of context, it makes whatever the recommendation phase harder,
Yeah.
because I haven't set the context,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's right.
So we gotta figure out how to.
Yeah, you see, this all becomes kind of chapter 1 of the commission's ultimate report.
Right.
Well, this was,
Excellent.
obviously governance is, we always knew governance would be sort of our follow behind committee, because they weren't going to be able to make options and recommendations till some of the deeper digging had occurred at the other service levels to sort of say, well, because there's themes actually that, as Joe knew before me, transgress across all the things, of problems, areas, things that we can do differently, everybody.
But this takes the baseline data
And this
that
takes
we
the baseline
have
data.
and maps it
Right.
in this way,
Right.
right? And that tells the story in a way that tax per capita.
Yeah.
Her slide doesn't. Her favorite slide. This
Right?
starts to
It's
talk to the
perfect.
why. That we're always looking for, why should you care? Why should we be doing this? Why should consensus exist?
I mean, Mark and B, don't you see this as having value in some of those presentations?
It's eye-opening.
Yeah. I think it speaks to a central message that we're trying to get across right now as we're transitioning from the baseline phase to the option phase, which is to remind people that we have to look at this as one community. That we have to stop looking at ourselves as, well, I live in Fayetteville, so I don't care what happens in Pompey, right? And I live in Camillus, and I don't care what happens on the east side of Syracuse. You know, we have certainly to date used the commuting data, I think, as the jumping off point for that, to say that we all touch physically many different parts of our community. But I think that this really speaks to the issues that we face, touch many different parts of one community, and they are common issues.
Do you want to roll?
What's that?
Do you have anything else?
I'm going to stop there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good. But again, we'll make that full presentation available to everybody. And I think the dialogue, you'll find the dialogue instructive and paint some additional context here. We spent about an hour and a half going through this stuff. It was a good discussion.
What do you think of this data? Compelling.
Yeah, I think it's about telling a story, and a story that relates to people's fears as well as their hopes.
Yep. Excellent. Any other reflections on what we talked about today? Reflections on what we need to focus on as we go forward? I think very good point. We need to move in that direction.
I would just say, what Melanie said too, is, one thing to consider, and it's not one area's problem, is we got to look at it as a united front. Even in presenting it to to people, even my group hasn't heard yet about the consensus. We have 40,000 working families. We think they're going to be eager to hear what has to be said about this. But just as an example, I look at up at the University Hill, you've got 3 hospitals, you've got 2 universities. You think of all the economic engines, it just comes from there. How many people work there? How many people are educated there and move on? I spent 8 years on that hill myself as a student. And how much of a benefit that is to the community, that's all tax-exempt property. And a lot of people say, well, it's the city's problem. But how many people from the suburbs work there and make their money there? And how many people get educated there? And it's not only an asset to the city of Syracuse, it's an asset to the county, it's an asset to the state, and actually even to the nation, because you got Newhouse, you've got areas of people that go on nationally. So, we have to look at that and say, that's not a city problem by any means. It's more of a county problem and even a state problem, but not a national problem. I think we have to look at it that way. I think people just have to start refocusing, not, I just live in Fayetteville and that's all I'm worried about, my little village. You gotta go way beyond that. I think that's what people understand.
Yeah, I don't think we should make it an assumption that the people who are out there in the community think that way.
Well,
no, and the reason I say that, go back 10 years to the study that was done by the Onondaga Citizens League, and the polling that was done in that study really showed that there was, in terms of the population of the community, a much broader perception of the fact that we are in this together. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the political leaders and the people who are in each of these municipalities are thinking that way. But in Fayetteville and Manlius, these folks are working in the city. There may be, it may be that the structure needs to catch up to what is already out there in the population. So I just would be cautious in assuming that we're fighting an uphill battle there. I think that I give people more credit, and actually the polling that was done by Jeff Stonecash.
We can circulate that. It is 10 years old, but it is interesting data from the OCL study, the survey and the survey responses that Larry's referencing.
For those of you on the phone, any questions, any comments? Thank you for being with us this morning. Next meeting is July 31st at 12 o'clock. Where? Do we know yet?
Not yet.
Okay. To be determined. Thank you all very,
Thank you
very
very
much for
much.
being here today.
Have a great year.
And want to really thank Mark to be with
Yep,
us.
oh, thank you.
Joe, thanks for the insightful presentation. It was really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Get some sleep, Joe.
So,
Yeah.
one,